March 18th, 2007, 03:40 hours. Camp Cropper, Baghdad. Captain Matthew Emerson sat across from a man who hadn't spoken in 6 weeks. Not a single word. The detainee, suspected Al-Qaeda facilitator, had beaten 4 interrogators. Standard questioning failed. Sleep adjustment failed. Every approved technique in the field manual failed. But Emerson didn't bring the standard interrogation folder. He brought a deck of playing cards. Through the one-way mirror, 3 senior intelligence officers watched with crossed arms. One already had his hand on the phone to shut this down. Any colonel reviewing this footage would call it insane. Playing cards with a high-value target, while Al-Qaeda car bombs killed civilians daily across Baghdad. And somehow, those 52 cards were about to unravel an entire terrorist network. But before we understand how a deck of cards broke a 6-week silence, we need to understand who Matthew Emerson was, because he was not the kind of man anyone expected to crack Al-Qaeda's network. Matthew Emerson grew up in Bakersfield, California, the second son of a diesel mechanic who worked the oil fields near Taft. His father, Robert, spent 30 years underneath Caterpillar engines, coming home each night with grease under his fingernails. Robert had a philosophy he'd learned from his own father. People talk when they feel human. They shut down when they feel trapped. Matt worked summers at his father's shop, changing oil on drilling equipment, listening to roughnecks and field supervisors. His father had a gift. He could get anyone talking, not through interrogation, but through recognition. He'd ask about their families, their fishing trips, the Dodgers game, and somewhere in those conversations, he'd figure out what was really wrong with their equipment. So what was Matt doing before the war? Managing a Costco in Fresno, handling inventory disputes, employee conflicts, shoplifting investigations. Nothing glamorous. He was methodical, patient, good at reading people who didn't want to be read. September 11th reached Bakersfield the same way it reached everywhere else, through television screens and a sudden understanding that everything had changed. Matt enlisted 6 weeks later. He was 24. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The Army sent him to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, for intelligence training. He learned the approved methodologies: the Human Collector Operations Manual, Army Field Manual, 2-22.3, the careful documentation procedures. He scored average marks, but instructors noted something odd in his file: unconventional approaches during role-play scenarios. What they meant was this. During a mock interrogation exercise, Matt abandoned the question tree entirely. He spent 20 minutes discussing the role player's fictional hometown, building rapport through seemingly meaningless conversation. The instructor gave him a C-. You're not here to make friends, soldier. You're here to extract intelligence. So what did Matt do? He practiced something else, quietly, in his off hours. He studied social psychology textbooks from the base library. He read about cognitive biases, about how people reveal information through patterns, through what they avoid saying more than what they say. He took notes in a spiral-bound notebook he kept in his wall locker. Other soldiers called him Professor. Not with respect, with mild mockery. But what Matt understood, what his instructors missed, was something his father had taught him years earlier. You don't extract information from people. You create conditions where they want to give it to you. Matt deployed to Iraq in January 2006, assigned to the 504th Military Intelligence Brigade. He arrived at Camp Victory outside Baghdad, just as sectarian violence reached its peak. IEDs killed 5 soldiers per day. Al-Qaeda in Iraq controlled entire neighborhoods, and conventional interrogation methods were producing almost nothing. Detainees understood the system. Stay silent for 90 days. Get transferred to lower security facilities. Eventual release through Iraqi judicial channels that couldn't prosecute without evidence. Matt watched senior interrogators work. They followed the manual precisely. Controlled questioning, documented procedures, minimal rapport building. Detainees gave name, rank, fabricated stories. Nothing useful. So what did Matt do differently? He started bringing items that seemed irrelevant to interrogations. Photographs of California landscapes, a magazine article about soccer, a harmonica he'd bought at the PX. Other interrogators thought he'd lost focus. His team leader pulled him aside. "Emerson, this isn't therapy. These are enemy combatants. Stick to the protocols." Matt nodded, and kept doing it anyway. But here's what nobody expected. By March 2007, his methods had produced 3 minor intelligence leads. Nothing extraordinary, but consistent results where others got silence. His superiors tolerated it because he documented everything, never crossed legal lines, never violated the field manual. He was weird, but he was legal. Then they brought in the high-value target from Diyala province. March 17th, 2007, 1600 hours, Camp Cropper Detention Facility. The detainee arrived in an armored convoy, hooded, flex-cuffed, silent. Intelligence assessments indicated he was a senior facilitator for Al-Qaeda in Iraq, possibly connected to the network running vehicle-borne IEDs into Baghdad's Green Zone. He'd been captured during a nighttime raid in Bakba after pattern of life analysis tracked him to 3 safe houses. So why couldn't anyone break him? For 6 weeks, 4 different interrogators tried every approved technique: extended questioning sessions, sleep adjustment, environmental manipulation within legal limits, good cop, bad cop dynamics. He gave them nothing. Not even his real name. And the intelligence value was enormous. If he talked, he could reveal VBIED construction sites, facilitator networks, financing channels, target selection processes, the entire operational structure of Al-Qaeda's Baghdad campaign. Hundreds of lives hung on information locked inside his head. On March 17th, Matt's team leader approached him in the Tactical Operations Center. "Emerson, you want a shot at the Diyala detainee?" Matt looked up from his workstation. "The one nobody's cracked?" "Yeah. You've got 72 hours before he gets moved to a different facility." The team leader paused. "And Emerson, no weird shit. This one matters." What his team leader really meant was, do whatever your weird method is, but if it fails, we never authorized it. That night, Matt didn't sleep. He reviewed everything they had on the detainee: behavioral observations, medical records, items found during his capture. One detail caught his attention in the seizure inventory: a deck of cards, worn smooth, found in the detainee's vehicle, European-style playing cards, the kind used across the Middle East. And that's when Matt had an idea that would have gotten him laughed out of any interrogation course. He walked to the PX at 200 hours, bought 4 decks of cards, regular bicycle playing cards, returned to his quarters and stayed awake until dawn, shuffling, practicing, thinking about games that cross language barriers, about humanity that crosses enemy lines. At 340 hours, he walked into the interrogation room, and he spread 52 cards across the metal table. The detainee stared at the cards. Matt sat down slowly. Let the silence stretch. The room's HVAC system clicked on. Fluorescent tubes overhead created harsh shadows. Matt picked up 2 cards, 5 of spades, Jack of hearts. He placed them face up in the center of the table. He looked at the detainee and said, in English, "Your choice." What was the detainee thinking? His eyes moved between Matt and the cards. His jaw was set, arms crossed. The posture of a man who'd decided months ago that silence was survival. Through the one-way mirror, senior officers exchanged glances. One reached for the phone to shut this down. The other stopped him. Give him 5 minutes. So, what did Matt do next? He waited. 30 seconds. A minute. 2 minutes. Then he did something that violated every interrogation instinct. He picked up the cards, shuffled them back into the deck, and stood up. "Tomorrow," he said, and walked out. Through the one-way mirror, one of the senior officers turned to the others. What the hell was that? But something had happened in that room. Something subtle. For the first time in 6 weeks, the detainee's eyes had moved to something other than the walls. March 19th, 2007, 0340 hours. Matt returned at the same time. Same setup. Cards spread on the table. This time, he added something. A small notepad and a pencil placed near the detainee's right hand. He dealt 7 cards face down in front of the detainee, then 7 in front of himself. He turned over the top card of the remaining deck. 8 of diamonds. He placed a 9 of diamonds from his hand onto the pile. He gestured to the cards in front of the detainee. Your turn. 2 minutes of silence. Would the detainee respond? Then, almost imperceptibly, the detainee's eyes moved to his own cards, not reaching for them, just looking. Matt gathered up all the cards, shuffled them, and left. Through the mirror, the senior officers were growing impatient. One sent a message. What is the intelligence objective here? But Matt saw something they didn't. The detainee had looked at the cards, not at Matt, not at the translator, at the cards. That meant curiosity. And curiosity was the first crack in 6 weeks of silence. March 20th, 2007, 0340 hours. Third night. Same ritual. Matt dealt the cards. This time, after 5 minutes of silence, the detainee reached forward and placed a card on the pile. Wrong suit. Wrong number. Not a legal play by any card game rules, Matt knew. But it was engagement. Matt nodded. He didn't correct the play. He just placed another card. For 20 minutes, they played a game with no rules, each placing cards seemingly at random. But what was Matt really doing? He was watching the detainee's hands. The man had scars across 3 knuckles, old burns on his left wrist. Each time he reached for a card, he hesitated fractionally before the red suits, hearts, and diamonds. Body language. Patterns. The things people reveal without speaking. After 30 minutes, Matt gathered the cards and pushed the notepad forward. He drew a simple diagram. A circle, a square, a triangle. He pointed to the circle. The detainee stared at the paper. Then, slowly, he picked up the pencil and drew a 4th shape, a star. Matt nodded and left. The senior officers were furious. 3 nights, and we have geometric shapes. We need actionable intelligence. But Matt had something they didn't understand. He had the detainee drawing, engaging, thinking about something other than silence and survival. He had the first real communication in 6 weeks. March 21st, 2007, 0340 hours. 4th night. Matt didn't bring cards this time. He brought photographs, not interrogation materials. Pictures he'd printed from the internet at the TOC. Images of mosques in Baghdad, marketplaces, the Tigris River, streets in Diyala province where the detainee had been captured. He spread them on the table like playing cards. Why photographs? The detainee's posture changed, subtle but real. His shoulders lowered fractionally. His breathing slowed. Matt placed one photograph in the center, a street market in Bakba, vendors selling oranges and bread, children running between stalls. Pre-war photography. Peaceful. He looked at the detainee and said in English, "Home." The translator moved to interpret. Matt shook his head. The detainee's eyes fixed on the photograph. For the first time in 6 weeks, his expression shifted, not to sadness, to something else. Recognition. Memory. Humanity. And then Matt did something completely unauthorized. He placed the notepad and pencil in front of the detainee and walked out of the room. He left the detainee alone with the photographs and the notepad. The door open. A guard visible in the hallway but not hovering. The senior officers erupted. One grabbed the phone. "Get him back in there. You can't leave a detainee unsupervised with materials." Matt stood in the hallway, watching through the one-way mirror. For 3 minutes, nothing happened. Would it work? The detainee picked up the pencil. He began drawing on the notepad. Not writing. Drawing. A map. Streets. Buildings. Locations marked with small X's. When the guard entered to collect the materials 20 minutes later, the detainee had filled 3 pages. 3 pages of intelligence that 4 interrogators and 6 weeks of standard techniques had failed to produce. March 22nd, 2007, 0340 hours. 5th night. Matt came with a translator this time. Not the usual one. A younger Iraqi-American soldier who'd grown up in Dearborn, Michigan, who understood dialectal nuances. Matt placed the drawings the detainee had made on the table. He pointed to one X on the map. "Tell me about this place. Would 6 weeks of silence end?" The detainee looked at Matt for a long time. Then, in Arabic, he spoke his first words in 6 weeks. "Why do you care?" How do you answer that question? Matt leaned forward, his voice quiet, measured. Because I think you're tired of protecting people who don't care if you live or die. The detainee's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away, and that's when Matt said something that changed everything. You've been in custody for 43 days. In that time, no one from your network has attempted to negotiate your release. No one has sent a message. No lawyer. No pressure through tribal channels. He let that settle. They've moved on without you, but you still protect them. Why? The detainee's hands, resting on the table, trembled slightly. You think I am afraid of you? Matt shook his head. No. I think you're afraid of being forgotten. I think you're afraid that if you go back, if you're released, they won't trust you anymore, that you'll be nothing. Silence stretched for 2 minutes. What would the detainee do? He spoke again, slowly. What do you want? I want you to tell me about the places you marked. Not because I'm threatening you, but because you know that what they're doing, the VBIEDs, the markets, the children, you know it's wrong. You've known it for a long time. The detainee closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. The first location is a garage in Sadr City, and for the next 4 hours, he talked. The intelligence flowed in a torrent. Matt took notes by hand, filling page after page while the translator worked. The detainee described 16 VBIED construction sites across Baghdad and Diyala province, 7 safe houses used for operational planning, 12 facilitators by name and description, 3 financing channels through Jordanian intermediaries. He explained the targeting methodology for selecting markets and checkpoints, the command structure connecting cell leaders to senior Al-Qaeda leadership in Anbar province. He drew detailed maps, street-level diagrams showing entry points, guard rotations, vehicle storage locations. He identified specific individuals, their real names, their code names, their family connections, their operational roles. He explained the communication system, how orders were passed through couriers using coded language, how timing was coordinated, how they identified coalition patterns and exploited them. But more than tactics, he explained the psychology, how they recruited young men from Sadr City and Diyala by offering money for families, purpose for the directionless, revenge for those who'd lost relatives to coalition operations, how they maintained loyalty through both brotherhood and fear, how they justified targeting civilians by framing it as religious war. But why was he talking now after 6 weeks of silence? Matt asked questions, but never aggressively. He'd pause when the detainee grew tired, offer water, let the man choose when to continue. The rapport they'd built over 5 nights, through cards, through photographs, through recognition of humanity, held steady. At 07:20 hours, the detainee leaned back in his chair, exhausted. Why did this work? He asked Matt. The others, they tried to make me afraid. You made me remember I was human. March 22nd, 2007, 1000 hours, Brigade Intelligence Operations Center. Matt delivered the intelligence to his chain of command. 16 typed pages, cross-referenced with grid coordinates and detainee statements, translated and verified. The Stew, a major with 2 deployments and 15 years of intelligence experience, read it twice. What was his reaction? Captain Emerson, how did you get this? I played cards with him, sir. The major set the papers down. You played cards. Yes, sir. And I left him alone with photographs of his hometown. And I treated him like a person instead of a detainee number. Would Matt face consequences for his unauthorized methods? The major's expression was unreadable. You understand this violates standard interrogation protocols. Sir, it violates the informal protocols. It doesn't violate the field manual. I never coerced him. I never threatened him. I built rapport through non-coercive means, which is explicitly authorized under FM 2-22.3, Appendix M. The major studied Matt for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone. Get me the task force commander, and tell the targeting cell to stand by. We've got actionable intelligence on 16 Al-Qaeda sites in Baghdad. Over the next 14 days, coalition and Iraqi forces conducted raids on 11 of the 16 locations. They captured 7 VBIED construction facilities. Inside, 4,200 pounds of homemade explosives, 14 vehicles rigged for suicide attacks, 23 detainees. They secured 4 safe houses containing operational plans, communication equipment, and $340,000 in U.S. currency. They arrested 9 mid-level facilitators, including Abu Omar, the man with the facial scar, who was subsequently linked to 26 VBIED attacks across Baghdad. They seized documentation connecting the Baghdad cells to senior Al-Qaeda leadership in Anbar province. 5 locations had been abandoned. The network had shifted after the detainees' capture, but the intelligence was accurate enough to provide pattern-of-life analysis that led to additional targets. So how many lives did this save? Conservative estimates suggested the raids prevented between 14 and 20 planned VBIED attacks. Each attack typically killed 8 to 15 civilians and wounded 30 to 50 more. The mathematical calculus was grim but clear. Matt's interrogation had saved between 112 and 300 lives, but the intelligence revealed something larger. The operational tempo of Al-Qaeda's Baghdad campaign was unsustainable. They were losing mid-level leadership faster than they could replace them. The facilitator networks were fragmenting. Within 6 months, VBIED attacks in Baghdad dropped by 60%. The disruption of this specific network had measurable impact. April 2007. Camp Victory, Baghdad. Matt was called to a secure conference room. Present, the brigade commander, a colonel from Multinational Corps Intelligence, and 2 civilians from an agency that didn't announce its name. The colonel spoke first. Captain Emerson, your interrogation methodology has attracted attention. We'd like you to brief our interrogation working group on your approach. But would Matt's method become official doctrine? Matt shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I'm not sure it's replicable. It worked with this detainee. That doesn't mean we're not asking if it's replicable. We're telling you to explain it so we can determine that ourselves. Over the next hour, Matt described his methodology: the use of non-threatening objects to build rapport, the gradual normalization of interaction, the focus on recognizing detainee humanity without compromising intelligence objectives, the strategic use of silence and patience, the importance of cross-cultural understanding. One of the civilians interrupted. You're describing social psychology applied to human collection. Yes, sir. That's essentially what it is. Did you receive training in this approach? No, sir. I studied it independently. And my father taught me that people talk when they feel human, not when they feel cornered. So what happened to Matt's method? The colonel made notes. Captain, we're going to ask you to do 2 things. First, document this methodology in detail. Second, conduct training for other interrogators before you redeploy. Can you do that? Matt hesitated. Sir, I'm not an expert. I just got lucky. Captain, luck doesn't produce 16 actionable intelligence leads and prevent 20 VBIED attacks. Skill does. Write it down. Matt spent the next month drafting what became known informally as the Emerson Report Protocol, a supplementary methodology emphasizing patience, cultural intelligence, and rapport building through shared human experience. It wasn't revolutionary. Military psychologists had advocated similar approaches for decades. But Matt's documentation was practical, ground level, written by someone who'd actually done it in combat conditions. He trained 43 interrogators at Camp Victory and Camp Cropper before his deployment ended in August 2007. Some thought he was soft, naive, that his method wouldn't work against hardened detainees. Others tried it and found moderate success. Not the dramatic breakthrough Matt had achieved, but consistent improvements in detainee cooperation. But did it change official military doctrine? The methodology never became official doctrine. The Army didn't rename interrogation protocols or add Matt's name to field manuals. But quietly, steadily, the emphasis shifted. More interrogators began using rapport-building techniques. More emphasis was placed on cultural understanding. The approach didn't replace aggressive interrogation. It supplemented it, provided an alternative when standard methods failed. At Fort Huachuca, the intelligence school began teaching case studies in advanced interrogation courses. They didn't use Matt's name. They anonymized it, called him an intelligence officer in Iraq, but they taught the core principle. Sometimes the most effective way to extract information is to stop extracting and start listening. By 2010, elements of Matt's approach appeared in updated Army training materials, described as advanced rapport-based elicitation techniques. No formal attribution, no dramatic announcement, just a quiet acknowledgement that humanity, even in war, could be a tactical advantage. September 2007, Bakersfield, California. After 14 months in Iraq, Matt returned home to Bakersfield. He was 29 years old, 30 pounds lighter than when he'd deployed. With a Bronze Star citation that mentioned exceptional intelligence collection without specifying details, he moved back into his parents' house temporarily. His father, now 61, still worked at the diesel shop, still came home with grease under his fingernails. One evening, Matt told him about the detainee, the cards, the intelligence that resulted. Robert Emerson listened without interrupting. When Matt finished, his father was quiet for a long moment. "You remember what I told you? About people talking when they feel human?" "Yeah, Dad, I remembered." "Good. Because that's all it ever is, son. People want to be seen, even the ones who've done terrible things." Matt took a job as a behavioral analyst for the California Department of Corrections, working with inmates in administrative segregation, the most isolated, violent, difficult prisoners in the system. He applied the same principles: patience, rapport, recognition of humanity. He wasn't trying to save the world. He was trying to solve problems, one conversation at a time. He married a woman named Sarah, whom he'd known in high school, a nurse at Kern Medical Center. They had 2 daughters. He coached their soccer teams. He never spoke about Iraq unless directly asked. And even then, he kept it brief. But there's something about Matt's story that most people don't know. In 2019, at age 41, Matt Emerson died from complications related to traumatic brain injury, residual effects from an IED blast he'd experienced during his deployment. One he'd never mentioned to his family. The blast had occurred 3 weeks before his successful interrogation. He'd refused medical evacuation, completed his mission, and carried the injury home without complaint. His obituary in the Bakersfield Californian ran 8 lines. It mentioned his military service, his work with the Department of Corrections, his family. It did not mention the detainee, the cards, the lives saved. 200 people attended his funeral, among them 7 former soldiers from his intelligence unit, including the team leader who'd given him 72 hours with the Diyala detainee. None of them spoke publicly about what Matt had accomplished in that interrogation room, but afterward, quietly, they told his daughters, "Your father saved a lot of people, more than you'll ever know, and he did it by being kind when kindness seemed impossible." There's a temptation to call stories like this myth, to think that wars are won by firepower, by superior technology, by overwhelming force. But the truth is harder and more human. Wars are decided by moments like these, by intelligence officers who understand that the enemy is still human, by soldiers who refuse to abandon principles even when principles seem tactically inefficient, by men and women who recognize that cruelty might extract fear, but kindness extracts truth. Matt Emerson didn't win the war in Iraq. He didn't change the trajectory of Al-Qaeda. He didn't revolutionize military interrogation, but he saved lives, specific lives, with names and families. By doing something radical, he treated an enemy prisoner like a human being worth knowing. And in war, sometimes that's everything. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't force. Sometimes it's a deck of cards and the patience to see another person across the table. What would you have done in Matt's position? Would you have trusted patience over pressure? Would you have risked your career on something as seemingly foolish as playing cards with a high-value detainee who had information on imminent attacks? What shocked you most about this story? That it took 5 nights of silence before the breakthrough, or that no one in his network tried to negotiate his release? Did you know that rapport-based interrogation techniques are now taught at military intelligence schools, largely because of cases like this? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe that remembering quiet heroes means honoring the ones who chose humanity when hatred seemed easier, share this with someone who needs to know that wars aren't always won with weapons. Sometimes they're won with wisdom. Because sometimes the smallest gesture becomes the most powerful strategy. Because sometimes one person, one conversation, one deck of cards is enough to save hundreds of lives.